Great song. Thank you for that. Good morning. It's interesting, when I sat down, there were like 12 people here. So you all appeared. But thank you for being here. Good to see you all this morning. So at the beginning of the year, I kind of like to go back to basics, kind of look at some unity teaching, some unity basic teachings. And so I thought we might start with the 5 principles a bit, because I think that, well, the first principle talks about God. What is God? And I think that idea, what we believe about God, has such a powerful impact on our lives. You know, what we think about God, what we believe about God, really affects a lot of what we do, how we see each other, how we see the world. You know, we sometimes see this in our world where there is this religious extremism when we believe that God, and we see it all over the place. I mean, we see it very often in our culture today with some religious extremism about God and how that affects people's lives and how they view life and how they believe about other people and about other things. And we see it not only in Christianity, but we do see it in Christianity. We see it in other religions as well. We also see it, I mean, even if you don't believe there is a God, so to speak, that's a belief, isn't it? It's an idea about God, it's a belief about God, even if you don't believe in a God. And so I think it's important for us to question that. You know, Unity's first basic principle says God is absolute good everywhere present. Well, what does that mean? Do you believe that? Have you questioned that? Have you accepted that? I think it's good to question. I think it's good to question everything. I know I question my traditional Christian beliefs. I don't think we need to accept any idea blindly. Do you agree? So, I was reminded again of Reverend Ellen Davenport's book, The 5 Principles. You know, Unity has 5 basic principles. And in the first part of the book, she talks about, if I had one wish for the world, it would be that every adult re-examine his or her view of God at least once per decade. I would say at least once a year. But, but she says a decade, because sometimes we outgrow our ideas about God. How many of you have the same idea about God today that you had when you were 10 years old? I would imagine very few of us have that idea about God. And she talks about having an idea, a God for grown-ups. What would a God for grown-ups be? And she has 3 different things. First, one that meets us where we are and welcomes our questioning, growing, changing, and doubting. A God for grown-ups has to be more than Santa Claus. Third, most people want to believe that God is involved in their lives. And then she goes on to say, are we allowed to make up our own God? Of course. It's called theology. So are we allowed to make up our own idea about God? Of course we are. I watched a movie, actually I've watched it twice now, called Emancipation. Has anybody seen the movie Emancipation? I don't want to ruin it for you. It's on Apple TV. It's a movie starring Will Smith as a man named Peter. And Peter is a Haitian man who is enslaved in Confederate Louisiana in the 1860s. And he is a man, as being an enslaved man in 1860s, who has experienced horrific treatment. Beaten, whipped, burned, thrown down a well, taken out of the well and beaten again, forced to work in horrible conditions, placed barely good enough for animals to live in. And one of the opening scenes of the movie, he is in this shack where he and his wife and 3 children live. And you see him down on the floor washing his wife's feet. And this is what he says as he is washing his wife's feet. Give thanks to God, for he is good. His love endures forever. The Lord is with me, I will not be afraid. The Lord is my helper. I will look in triumph at my enemies. He is my strength and my defender. The Lord is God. He will shine upon those who trust in him. Now, this is a man who has been enslaved for, you don't really know in the movie how long he's been enslaved, but apparently for quite a long time. This is a man who is about to be taken away from his family and carted off to another location where he will be helping build a railroad in other horrific conditions. And he is carted off with these other men to this place where they are in chains, collars and chains, and they're led to this, I don't know, it's like a corral or something, where they're made to just be there on the floor and in chains. And there's this one man who's been whipped and beaten and burned and put a brand on his face. And can you imagine? Can you imagine the suffering that they had to endure? And even there's a man who is upset and crying and worried, and this man, Peter, says to him, God is with us. And the man who has been branded and beaten and lying on the floor says, how can you say that to him? Where is he? Why has he not set you free? Stand up and praise your God for all he's done for you. God is not with you. He is nowhere. That probably would have been my attitude if I had been in that situation. And what he says to this man who says God is nowhere, he says, God says many things. I don't know why God shows himself to some and not to others. And then he says, but if you don't know him, I will pray for you. Now, and then, then finally, I don't want to ruin the movie for you, but he finally finds a way to run and escape, and through this horrible swamp and everything, he's moving through this swamp 5 days to try to reach freedom, and he's still affirming, God is with me, God is my salvation. I will not fear my enemies, I will not fear anything, God is my salvation. And when I see that, I think, my first reaction is to that. I see that and I think, ugh, I used to believe that. I used to believe that way. I used to believe that God was somewhere out there. God was this deity. And like he said, this is really what struck me about that, not among other things. But he said, God will shine upon those who trust in him. Like God is a God of reward and punishment. Somehow there's this God up there who's keeping track of everything you do. And if you do the right thing, you'll be rewarded. If you do the wrong thing, you're going to be punished. Anybody else ever have that idea about God? Right? That's the idea of God I grew up with. That somehow God is up there, out there somewhere. And then I got into New Thought. I found New Thought. New Thought found me. I don't know which really applies, but New Thought took hold of me in a way, and that was with unity and with religious science. And I began to have a different idea about God. But for me, in that way, I threw the baby out with the bathwater. God is not out there. God is in here. There's no God out there because I am an expression of God. God is me. I am that expression, right? That's what we begin to believe, or what I began to be taught. And so I look at that movie and I see this man who is defiant, and he is faithful, and he is moving through this life that I can't even imagine anyone having to suffer through. He is running through the swamp fighting snakes and alligators and God only knows what else. And he's listening and he's following and he's being guided and he's determined to reach freedom. And I would look at that from my adolescent New Thought idea and say what he's doing is he's calling upon the God within him. What we call the 12 powers of man, as Charles Fillmore talked about. There's not a God out there. The God is in here. The God is his faith, the power of faith, to hold this vision of freedom and to work toward it and to see how can you possibly, I would be like this God. Where's God? I don't see God here. How can you say there's a God when we are suffering this way? But this man had a power of faith to be able to see beyond what his condition was. Power of faith. And he called upon his power of wisdom, intuition. He didn't have a map. He didn't have a compass. He didn't have anything like we tools. He didn't have an iPhone to show him where to go. No, he followed the signs. He followed followed nature. He followed the birds. He listened. Intuition, guidance. He called upon that inner strength of the power of the divine within him to move through all of that. Called upon all of those divine powers of life and zeal, and what we call the power or dominion, to control or to monitor our thinking and our feeling. Can you imagine if you're walking through that, if you're working toward freedom and you're being hunted down with dogs and a man on a horse who's trying to kill you, capture you, and then kill you? Can you imagine the thoughts that might be going through your head, the fearful thoughts that might be going through your head, or the worry or the doubt and all of that? And still, he called upon his power of dominion, I would say, to again say, the Lord is my salvation. I will not fear. Great affirmations, aren't they? So from my beginning, this New Thought idea, God is not out there, God is here, right now. And I can call upon those powers within me. You can call upon those powers within you. And that's that is the God that I latched onto for a long time. And then again, I began to question that. And I began to recognize that God, as I understand God, is life itself. It's energy itself. It's life force. And that life force energy is in everything and everyone. Everything. So God is not some deity out there, not just something that is me or within me, but God is within everything. My understanding of God became a little bit more. And so as I see that movie, and please watch it if you have the opportunity, this man was interacting with God through the whole process. He was having a relationship with God through nature, through the wind, through the birds. He had a relationship with God through the bees who provided him with honey to eat. He had a relationship with the bees who provided honey and he knew that honey had antibacterial properties, and he was able to use it as a salve on his cuts. He was a man who called upon that wisdom of nature, the properties of nature, the healing in nature. That's God too, isn't it? God is in all of that. So God out there, God in here, God in everything. Reverend Paul Smith, who is a retired Methodist minister from Kansas City, wrote a book called Is Your God Big Enough, Close Enough, You Enough? The three faces of God. And he said he heard these when he was meditating, he was studying Scripture, he was really looking at the teachings of Ken Wilber, if you're familiar with Ken Wilber, integral theory. And he took these words to heart. He said, Jesus talked about God, as God, and to God. And so can we. Jesus talked beyond us, the inner God, the God that is being us, and the intimate or God beside us. And so I think we can limit ourselves. I know I limited myself when I thought about first God out there, and then only God in here, and God in everything. I think it's important for us to open ourselves up to an idea of God that embraces all of that. At least it has been for me, because I know that when I had a friend who, she was an asylum seeker from Africa who came here many years ago, and Jay and I helped her, worked with her. And she was so much into this idea of God out there. And she would pray to God to help her, to bring her peace, and her children were still in Africa, and she would always that idea of I'm not worthy, oh God, please help me. And my mind was going, oh my God, that idea of God, I just don't get it anymore. But I'll tell you what, that idea of God worked for her. It worked for her. Because it connected her with something bigger and broader and more powerful. And because of that, she gained strength and faith and power from that. It may not work for me, but that doesn't mean it's not right. Or that someone else is wrong because that's what they think about God. There are people who think I am blasphemous when I say God is within me. Right? How can you say that? And So can we open ourselves up to something bigger? A bigger idea of God. Knowing that no matter what our idea is about God, it's limiting. It's limiting. We can't know. I was walking through the bookstore this morning and I saw a copy of the Tao Te Ching. And the first lesson says this: Tao is beyond words and beyond understanding. Words may be used to speak of it, but they cannot contain it. Tao existed before words and names, before heaven and earth, before the 10,000 things. It is the unlimited father and mother of all limited things. Therefore, to see no bound beyond boundaries, to the subtle heart of things, dispense with names, with concepts, with expectations and ambitions and differences. Tao and its many manifestations arise from the same source, subtle wonder within mysterious darkness. Isn't that beautiful? Subtle wonder within mysterious darkness. This is the beginning of all understanding. So the God, the Tao that can be named is not God, is not the Tao. It is beyond our understanding. But above all things that I witnessed in this movie and with this life of this man named Peter was the power of love. Because his entire focus throughout the movie was a love for his wife and his children and his desire to get back to them, to find a way to go back and help them, to rescue them, to bring them into freedom. And as we've been talking about this morning, singing about and praying about and meditating about, it is the power of love that is the power to heal and to set us free. The power of love. And as I think about the power of love to set us free, I'm mindful that today is the birthday of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. A man who, yes, was a man. He was a man who believed in the power of love. He taught the power of love. He taught the power of forgiveness. Even in the midst of what was happening 100 years, a century after slavery was officially made illegal in the United States. There were still bombings and lynchings and discrimination. And we might say that that even occurs today. It does occur today. I don't want to lessen that. But Dr. King's legacy lives on. He made a powerful difference in this world because he focused on love. It is the heartbeat of the moral cosmos. He who loves is a participant in the being of God. He also said, I know that love is ultimately the only answer to mankind's problems. So as we honor him today and holiday tomorrow in His honor, I invite us to remember His legacy of loving those that we might see as our enemies, finding forgiveness in our hearts for those who might have harmed us, for knowing that whatever we believe about God, that if the only thing we believe about God is that God is love, then maybe that's enough. Because it truly is the only power expressed through you and through me that is going to heal. Whatever hurt we have experienced, or whatever hurt we may have inflicted. To see the face of the divine in everyone. To see that face reflected back to us through the eyes of love. That is what will heal. And so again, I just invite us to explore for ourselves this idea about God, because I do think it affects so many areas of our lives. And to not ever, talking to myself here, not ever believe I have all the answers. Or that I know and you don't know. But to be open and receptive to other ideas. But above all, to keep love at the center of our being, to keep love at the center of our thinking, of our feeling, of our acting. And to find ways to do that. So take a moment, if you will, with me now and breathe into that space of love. Breathe into your heart, awakening to love's presence here and now. Knowing that love is the power that heals and harmonizes, and the love that attracts, the power that attracts into our lives that which is a reflection of the highest good. And allow that energy of love to radiate out in front of you, and feel yourself being enfolded by this field of love. Feel it extending 6 feet out in front of you and around you, and you are just in this field of the energy of love. And I invite you to bring to your mind someone, something, some institution, something that you have a hard time loving. And gently, easily, if you're ready, just see if you can extend that love out a little further to embrace that one, that institution, that circumstance. To surround it in love, to uplift it in the power of love, to allow the power of love to be that which heals, knowing that love is intelligent energy. It knows what is needed in every situation. You don't have to direct it, just allow it, extend it, be it. And allow love to do its perfect work. And now release that person, that situation, institution, whatever it is. And know that your work is complete. To simply be the presence of love. To extend that love out into the world. And allow love to be your guiding force for good. Breathe it in. Feel every cell of your body awakening to love. Feel yourself as a radiating center of divine love. A healing presence in the world. And so it is. Namaste.